You're listening to Scaling Up Services, where we speak with entrepreneurs, authors, business experts, and thought leaders to give you the knowledge and insights you need to scale your service-based business faster and easier. And now, here is your host, business coach Bruce Eckfeldt.
Are you a CEO looking to scale your company faster and easier? Check out Thrive Roundtable. Thrive combines a moderated peer group mastermind, expert one-on-one coaching, access to proven growth tools, and a 24/7 support community. Created by Inc. award-winning CEO and certified scaling up business coach Bruce Eckfeldt, Thrive will help you grow your business more quickly and with less drama. For details on the program, visit eckfeldt.com/thrive. That's ECKFELDT.com/thrive.
Welcome, everyone. This is Scaling Up Services. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. And our guest today is Harrison Monarth, and he is executive coach, New York Times best-selling author. He focuses on leadership development, executive presence. I'm always interested in talking with folks that are in this executive space, helping leaders perform better, be more effective, have better presence. With that, Harrison, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bruce. It's excited to speak with you.
So why don't we learn a little bit more about you and your background and how you got into the leadership development, executive presence space, and then we can get into that subject. There's a lot of questions I have, but let's learn more about you first. Tell us about the background. How did you get into this?
Sure. Yeah, let's see. So I'm originally from Germany, and I left Germany in my early 20s, moved outside of the country, not into anything other than German-speaking Austria, so it was comfortable.
Yeah.
So I moved to Vienna and got a job as a marketing director. I was already fluent in English. I'd actually taught myself English when I was a teenager, just learning it. I loved the language, the sound of it. So I thought Americans were just the coolest, people on the planet. So I was fluent by the time I was 17, and just always had an interest in expanding on that. So left Germany, went to Austria, became a marketing director for a commercial real estate network, and the president of that in Vienna was also a parliamentarian. So he was in the Viennese parliament. And so part of my time was actually spent helping him, preparing him for his appearances, for his speeches. It was really just intuitive because he had to do a lot of it in English. And so he thought I would be good to help him. So he actually became very successful and gave me a lot of credit. So just intuitively, I helped him, with his presence. Well, I didn't really know anything at the time. But so I really liked where this was going and how he really got lots of great attention. So anyway, I decided I'm going to study effective communication, everything from theater to psychology to, really just became obsessed with learning how people can show up more effectively and more successfully. And so that over the years then turned into me basically becoming a coach, a trainer, a coach. And then in 1995, I had a chance then to come to the U.S. And work with a couple of companies in Washington that eventually got settled. And in 1999, then officially started my company, GuruMaker Executive Development, and wrote my first book on effective speaking in 2006 with McGraw-Hill. That book did very well. And then I basically, over the following years, more and more was sort of asked to do executive coaching, where it was beyond communication skills, beyond speaking and presenting. It was really more about, how can our leaders become more effective people managers and persuade people more effectively and influence people in a positive way. And then in 2009, I wrote the first edition of Executive Presence, the book. That really then launched me as an executive coach. And so the second edition just came out, after 10 years last month. And so I'm excited to share that with people and to continue to help people become more successful at work.
Yeah. Well, and it's a great topic because I think a lot of the challenges, folks on this podcast, that listen here are really about that. As the company grows, as I grow and scale my business, particularly a service-based business, I have to start working with people more, right? It's easy when, it's just me, I'm sitting in a corner and I don't really have to interact with folks much. But, once I start to grow and scale the business, leadership really evolves from this kind of doing the work to managing people, leading people that are doing the work. And that's a hard transition, I think, for a lot of folks. And a lot of people struggle with it. Talk to us a little bit about when we use the word executive presence. Like, let's unpack that a little bit. What are we referring to? How does this, how does kind of leadership and management fit into this? And what's your kind of model, or how do you think about the whole sort of topic or category of executive presence?
Yes, good question. And, it is a bit of a sort of a foggy concept for a lot of people. In fact, and I like to tell the story when I came out with the first edition of the book in 2009. Shortly after, I got a call from a talent management executive at Merck Pharmaceuticals. And she said, we've identified a group of leaders that need to work on their executive presence, so we're interested in coaching. And then she paused and she said, but what is it?
So they've identified the need, but they're not sure what it is.
Exactly. Couldn't quite put the finger on it, knows it when know it when they see it, kind of a thing. And so it was very interesting to me. And so again, over the last 10 years then, I've really done a lot of research and, of course, really figured out what are the components of executive presence. So, for instance, my own appreciation of what executive presence is was formed in several ways. Number one, years of conversations with senior leaders I've worked with about what executive presence looks like and the qualities that they need to see in emerging leaders. Close observation of respected leaders that bring out the best in others. Then, of course, the research in the social sciences, leadership literature. And then finally, also the failures of people that I've worked with and that I've seen who had talent and cognitive ability, but nonetheless, they failed or derailed because of an unwillingness to basically listen to feedback and adapt their behavior. So that was how my appreciation was formed. But ultimately, Bruce, executive presence is about influence and impact, right? And it can certainly be about a negative influence, right? An intimidating influence. But the way I coach it and teach it just to help people become successful and then make their people and organizations successful is I talk about a positive influence and a positive impact. And so, right, and there are components. There are, I'll just give you a few of them. In my book, I identified 17 different components of executive presence, some of them being, some of the obvious ones, like your physical appearance, your communication ability, right? Your ability to articulate messages in a clear, convincing and appealing way, just to tell a simple story that makes sense to people. Acting decisively, projecting confidence. Even your status and reputation have an impact, of course, on your executive presence.
Sure.
Being able to have difficult conversations, not shying away from that, or holding people accountable. Having political savvy, so not shying away from building relationships with people that, even above your own level, right?
Yeah.
So those are all some components of executive presence. And, as far as, business leaders are concerned, whether you have a small business with a handful of people or a much larger organization, the thing to realize is, anybody can stand to work on their executive presence or on their presence. But one thing to realize is that we all have a profile, right? So it's not like we either have it or don't have it. We have some things that we're decent at, and other things that we need to work on. So that's something important to keep in mind. So when we are investigating, where do I need to work? What are some of my, weaker areas? That's important to keep in mind, that you do have strengths as well. Yeah. It's also important to realize that executive presence can shift over time. In other words, if you say you are very confident when you're meeting a new client or peers or colleagues, and you're a good conversationalist, and great physical appearance, but then you get in front of a higher stakes audience. Maybe you're giving a talk, right, to government officials or even more senior level executives. All of a sudden, you start stammering, you get nervous, anxious, right? Your executive presence goes right out the window. Yeah. So it's being aware of, what those things are, what those situations are, which means developing your self-awareness and managing your emotions in those situations. And so in my book, I also talk about, I have an entire chapter on how to regulate your emotions. There are 5 different neuroscience-backed ways to do that. And, frankly, any business owner, any leader, if you can't keep it together in tough situations, then forget about your presence. You're just not going to be very successful.
Yeah, your effectiveness.
Exactly. If you can't think clearly, right, all those things.
Yeah, I'm curious, the idea that sort of context ends up having a big impact. I certainly see that a lot. I know folks who are, just top of their game when it's, a subject matter and a situation or a context that they're familiar with, they've been in before, they're comfortable, but you switch context on them and they're completely different. I mean, all the skills they have in one area just disappear when they switch context. I guess how much have you seen or what have you found as being kind of the context influencers that end up changing or impacting people's ability to have executive presence or be successful or be impactful in terms of their ability to be an executive?
Well, it has a huge impact, the context. So the one I just gave, for instance, being among peers, you can be, you can have all the confidence in the world, be really, really elegant in your interactions, and then all of a sudden, higher level executives, you become you're completely reduced in your effectiveness and in your communication ability and all that stuff. But what's interesting too, what you just brought up about the context. So some of the leaders that I work with, let's say they're from the director level to the CEO level, right, or general manager level. And one thing that's interesting is when people shift or they move into a different position, right? So let's say they were, they're an expert in a particular function, and now they're moved to a different function, let's say, where they need to now learn completely new things, and they have a team working for them that is very competent in that domain or in those areas, right? So these are people now leading a team of experts that know a heck of a lot more about subject matter than they do. And so, some of the questions I get sometimes and what I'm seeing is that leaders are often uncomfortable admitting that they know less, or that they feel that they need to show the strength and the confidence and the competence to lead this team. And quite the opposite is actually necessary. Because listen, an expert can immediately sniff out whether you know what you're talking about. If it looks like you are trying to posture or pretend, then you're really losing the respect of people. Then they feel like, oh my gosh, it's one of those. But if you actually say to people, if you have the humility and foresight to say, look, you guys are a lot smarter than I am when it comes to this. Obviously there's a reason why I'm here, but I need to learn from you, right? I'm going to listen to you. I want to hear from you. I need to get up to speed. So tell me what you know. Tell me what you think. How should I be looking at things? And then you can still make up your own mind. So you have to obviously learn, and you have to learn fast, but have the humility too, so that you can be comfortable with that. Be confident in that, in your ability to grow and learn, rather than trying to pretend and have this sort of Potemkin expertise, which, anybody can just poke a hole through.
Yeah. It's interesting. I see that come up a lot. I work with a lot of technology companies and kind of, heavy science kind of background companies. And you get these founder CEOs who are brilliant programmers or data scientists or, biologists, pharmacology things. And they move into these leadership positions and they very quickly become uncomfortable and actually can be quite dysfunctional when they start having to manage these other areas that they don't know about. And they're so used to knowing more than everyone else that they don't have, kind of the skills or capability or mindset to be able to effectively manage folks in a situation where they have to kind of trust, or they don't know the domain nearly as well as these folks. I think it's a huge learning transformation that these CEOs need to go through. What are some of the kind of strategies or shifts that you see need to be made with executives when they move into a position where the people that they manage or they need to lead are much smarter than they are around the topic and the thing that they're trying to manage? Yeah,
I would say one of the things is just put your ego in check.
Yeah.
It's not about, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, I'm not the first one to say this, but if you are the smartest person in the room, it's not a very dynamic room, right? So surround yourself with the smartest people. Pick people that are smarter than you, right? And then, help them work together, collaborate, show them that, obviously, as long as they understand the objective, they understand the vision of where you're going, the why of the work, even more important now with, millennials and newer generations, the purpose of the work. But then let them go. Right? Let them go, and support them as much as you can. And listen, they'll respect you for that. And then, of course, again, you still cannot neglect just having some subject matter knowledge. You cannot be, it's not what you need to do to be as much of an expert as everybody else. But you still have to be able to make decisions, which you can only do, right? When people bring you solutions and they make suggestions and proposals, you still need to be able to figure out, let's see which way should we go here? And you can only do that when you know a little bit about what's going on, at least.
Yeah. I'm curious if you found, is there one, or I guess, is there one way to have, or one good model for having a good kind of executive presence, or are there different types of kind of being a good executive? Or I guess, how much do you find that there's one ideal model, and versus how much there are different people with different styles and different makeups, and you can be good in many different ways. You just need to figure out like what your great way is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. First of all, in order to understand how much executive presence you have and what you need to work on, you have to have some self-awareness.
Yeah.
Right? You need to work on your self-awareness because we know lots of people that are doing things and saying things that really just kind of betray the fact that they have no self-awareness. You do a face slap and you go, holy cow, I can't believe they just said that or just did that. So very important. How do you develop your self-awareness? Because most of us are actually not very good at that, right? I mean, so many dismal statistics that 94% of college professors think they have above average teaching skills. And those are smart people. So, right? And
44% of them are wrong, but yeah.
Ask anyone. Ask a full room of people. How good of a driver do you think you are? Do you think you're an above average driver? You know what? 80% of people statistically will raise their hand that they're an above average driver. So the difference between how we see ourselves and how others see us, there's only a 30% overlap. So it means we absolutely have to work on self-awareness. How do we do that? There are different ways to do that. There is practicing mindfulness. So there's lots of information out there on how to do that. Emptying your mind of distracting thoughts and clutter, and just really being sort of in the moment and being focused, on what's happening around you. Then obviously, reflecting, just thinking about what are your values? What do you know you're good at, and what do you know that based on what you like and what you're running away from, what do you need to work on? And then the one that absolutely has to happen is you have to get observer feedback, right? For the reason I said earlier. So whether it's a 360, where you ask a group of people to tell you how you come across, your reputation, or you sit down with somebody, some people that you trust that are not necessarily your best friends, but people you trust, and you can say, look, I'm working on myself. I'm trying to grow in this particular area, and I'd love to know, how do I come across, or what worked for me in this particular project, and how could it have gone better? There's so many different ways to get the data that you need in order to see if you need to adjust. The one thing that you have to be very careful about is that you don't shut the person down, because the moment you start defending or explaining and rationalizing why you did something when they give you feedback, you're just basically cauterizing that feedback source. You're just completely cutting yourself off. They will never again tell you a thing that is helpful. So, just take the feedback, clarify if you have to, right? Clear, but then say thanks and move on.
Yeah, I like it. I do a lot of work with executive teams, and one of the things, so everyone talks about how to give feedback and training people how to give feedback. One of the things I do is I train everyone on how to receive feedback, because that's typically where the problem is. And it is exactly that. It's like, first of all, listen, and make sure that you understand it. And we talk about clarifying questions. What really is a clarifying question, and then say thank you, and then decide what to do with it later. You don't have to process it at that time, but making sure you understand what it is. So in terms of sort of evaluating yourself, how do you, so you kind of get this feedback, what is the model, or what is the list? I mean, I know you've got the elements in your book. How do I go through and kind of evaluate myself in terms of executive presence? And then how do I figure out really what I should work on? Is it just, finding your weakest one and figuring out how to improve that? Or how do you suggest people go through and develop some focus and some goals and some targets for themselves?
Bruce, this is really a very good question, because you could absolutely. We all have a bunch of stuff we could be working on, right? So knowing what to work on and picking that. So you're right. And some people might say, well, so I'm not really good at this or that, and so I'll pick this and start a program here. But is that really the right thing to work on? So the answer to it is, we talked about self-awareness earlier, getting self-awareness. So the key is to develop strategic self-awareness. And what strategic self-awareness is all about is it's comparative. So in other words,
Interesting.
People, basically, that's perfectly encapsulated, by the way, in the statement, what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's not always about how good you are, but how good you need to be in the context that you want to compete in. So in other words, strategic self-awareness, what are your strengths and weaknesses compared to your peers, compared to your rivals, compared to the standards that are being used to measure success and leadership. So Robert Hogan, the founder of Hogan Assessments, uses an interesting example. He says, so you might be an absolute champion in high school soccer, right? But then at the college level, you might still be pretty good, but you're no longer a standout. And at the Premier League, you won't even get a tryout. You're not even good enough at a tryout. So really, you have to measure yourself against the standards, or the rivals or the competitors or the peers against whom you could compete. Because in those, in the higher up you go, obviously, what skills, what behaviors, what knowledge do you need to have to play well? Basically, IQ and subject matter expertise are just no longer enough.
Yeah. Well, and also I think that idea of the context, like where you want to perform, and I always use this example of, if you want to be a marathon runner or you want to be able to squat 500 pounds, I mean, where you would focus and your, the performance goals that you would set and the activities that you would, work on are really different. So, it kind of depends on where you want to be and how you want to perform.
That's exactly right. I mean, a championship boxer, trains differently and works on different skills than a mixed martial arts fighter, let's say. I mean, absolutely. So that's strategic self-awareness. And so that, so instead of just having an inner focus, just really looking around and so how good do I need to be here?
Yeah.
And in what area?
So once I kind of figure out, I know where my current performance is, identify some goals based on context and the level that I want to perform at. What are some of the strategies, tools, techniques that you find effective to help executives actually learn those skills, develop those capabilities, become proficient and successful in those areas? How do they go about doing that?
So it really depends on the particular area. So if it's a matter of, for instance, just picking a couple of things in my line of work, so executives or leaders, managers that need to become more engaged in meetings, let's say. So I have leaders that are very intelligent. They are, so it might be a head of R&D or a functional leader, but they're just not engaged in meetings. Not because they don't have anything to say, but they've just made the choice basically to say, in fact, I've heard it more than once, one of my clients saying, you know what, Harrison, people are just talking a lot in these meetings, but they're not really saying anything. So I don't really want to contribute to the noise, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's happening, though, is you're creating a perception that you're disengaged, that you're not willing to take leadership here. And so and if they're already saying what you're saying, you know what my advice is? Say it first. First speak up, raise your hand, engage, so that, there's plenty of research out there that shows obviously that people are more confident and more leader-like, people that speak up, right, and engage. But there's more recent research from the Haas School of Business at Berkeley that found that not only are those people that speak up are not only are they seen as more confident, they're also seen as more competent. And they did various tests and studies to identify that people that are watching someone speak up and engage and make themselves heard are just automatically seen as more competent, as harder working, more conscientious, more creative, even when they actually aren't. When some of the answers they give aren't quite right, or they aren't quite the quickest ones to jump through. But because they are more engaged, they automatically, there's something happening at the subconscious level where we just, they are more leader-like. So you really have nothing to lose, in fact, everything to gain by just being more engaged, whether that's, obviously with your body language, and so you ask, hey, how do you develop this? In some cases, Bruce, we've made it so that the client has a quota. So in your 30 minutes, you speak up at least 3 times. That's it. That's your quota. So 3 things. Obviously, you're not going to make, hey, what time is lunch? One of those things, right? But you're going to contribute something of value to the conversation at the minimum of three times. So I've had it happen where when a client did that, a month later, I speak to the boss, and the boss says, oh my gosh, I don't know what you did, but much more engaged, willing to defend his ideas, stands up to, is willing to have a debate, all that stuff. And I'm thinking all it took was a pink little sticky note on his notepad, on his iPad that said, where he basically 3 times. And, obviously this suggests that people have access to those behaviors, right? There are other things like, regulating your emotions and managing up, right? So there you have to go a little deeper in terms of, or networking is another one.
Yeah.
Building relationships. Obviously, that's not necessarily super easy, as easy as having a quota where you speak up at a meeting. There could be some, deeper seated issues like, introverts aren't necessarily very comfortable reaching out to people and building those relationships, So there you need to find different strategies, and you need to find ways to reframe something like that, where it goes from basically, instead of saying, oh my God, I have to sell myself and I feel like I'm begging for attention and all that stuff. You really have to kind of, one strategy is to reframe that and basically say, look, how can I provide value to other people? How can I share something that might be useful for someone else, or even be a connector and connect people that I find? And by just reframing that, all of a sudden you just feel less. Francesca Gino found from Harvard Business School, she found that people actually feel dirty. They crave soap when they think about networking. I mean, literally, they crave cleaning material.
I got to take a shower afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when they think about networking, those that don't like it. And so by reframing the whole thing in terms of, here's what this is all about, and I'm looking at it as I'm helping, and I have some knowledge to share. Maybe I can connect a couple of people that would change their lives. All of a sudden, it just becomes a little less difficult to do.
I think that's interesting because I think it touches on this idea of, everyone has sort of a different wiring or a different makeup or different tendencies, different strengths and weaknesses, which means that, how they perform or where the challenge they run into in different skills or different capabilities, it's going to be quite different. I resonate with the introvert one. I test off the charts introvert. And so the networking is fascinating for me, where I've had to reframe it, kind of reposition it in my mind as being about connecting and being about curious about the person. So my thing is this kind of interviewer kind of style where I'm there to find out about them, and that drives my engagement on it, because I'm just not a natural, I'm not a high E person, so it doesn't come naturally to me. But I've had to do it, and I've been quite successful at it. But it is a different frame.
It is a different frame. I'm actually in the same category. I had to start, and I had this cultural conditioning too. Because Germans are not, Americans in general are just more outgoing, a little bit more extroverted, a little bit more friendly, and so I had sort of the cultural conditioning of being a bit more reserved and not as outgoing. So while I'm an introvert, a natural introvert, I know that in order to be effective, I have to behave as an extrovert. And so after behaving as an extrovert, after some time in various situations, is it super comfortable? No, I can't say it's something I naturally would do, but there's still, it's a lot easier. You do it automatically, right? You then do it automatically when you have to, when the situation calls for it.
Yeah. Well, and you have a strategy. I think the thing is you don't have to think about it. You kind of reduce this cognitive load of, you've got a system that you can rely upon to allow you to effectively perform the way you need to perform without it being this huge burden and stress on you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious, you were talking about the feedback, and I like the strategies of giving people the task, you have to do this at least 3 times during the meeting. One of my favorite things to do is to put someone in charge when I'm dealing with a team, is putting someone in charge of like recording how many times people ask a question or how many times people interrupt. And they, we go through the meeting and then someone presents and say, okay, well, you were interrupted 16 times, you interrupted 2, and just collecting the data and just putting that on the table is sometimes all you need to do to change behavior. And people are like, oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Well, and that's exactly right. And so actually, I talk about, speaking of changing behavior, when you see the data, in the book, I talk about self-awareness, how ER doctors don't think they're overprescribing opioids, but when they see the actual data, they're shocked. And so by presenting ER doctors across the country with the data about overprescribing, they drastically changed their behavior. But that was the only thing. Otherwise, they would have not done it. So they had to really see it. And so you're right. By just sometimes holding up a mirror and saying, well, here's the evidence. So, what do you think you ought to do? Or what do you think you want to do here? Right?
Yeah. I'm curious if I've done this a couple of times where we record sessions, video record. And I picked this up just coming out of sports, and I was was a competitive cross-country skier and stuff. And I always learned that, the coach can tell me 15 times that I'm not getting my weight over my ski. And I don't understand until they show me the video. I'm like, oh, I get what I'm doing wrong. Exactly. Have you had any success with, actually video or recording things so that they can, or audio, just giving people their own audio recordings to kind of hear, so they can hear it for themselves?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that's, and depending on, especially when we do presentation skills coaching and there are certain habits, whether it's, simple stuff like, wandering around without aim or without purpose, in front of the group, or doing certain things. It does help, right? To just kind of see what it is that you're doing. I mean, so however that feedback comes to you, and you have, as a coach, right, you have to figure out what works for the person. Not everything works the same way for everyone. So, yep.
Yeah. Perfect. Harrison, this has been a pleasure. If people want to find out more about you, about the coaching work you do, about the books that you've written, what's the best way to get that information?
Yeah, thanks. So the new book is out, so I'd love for people to check that out. The book is called Executive Presence, The Art of Commanding Respect Like a CEO. So that's on Amazon. Also just came out as an audiobook on Audible. And then, GuruMaker is the company. So GuruMaker, GuruMaker.com. It's GuruMaker Executive Development. And if people are interested in just kind of seeing what their own level of executive presence is right now, my colleague, Dr. Heather Walker, and I have created a self-assessment, the free 20-minute self-assessment that gives you a really good overview of where you might need to work on your executive presence. And basically that's the URL for that is executivepresenceindicator.com. So executivepresenceindicator.com, free assessment. You get the results right away. And a lot of people have said it's helped them a lot to kind of zero in on some of those areas they need to work on.
That's perfect. I'll make sure that the links to all of those are in the show notes here. And Harrison, you're based in New York City. Where do you do work? Well, when you work with clients, what's your geographic kind of focus or so?
We work globally. So basically, just last week, a few days ago, I came back from Brazil. I was in Malaysia a few weeks before that. And so we work globally. 99%, as you know, of coaching is, of course, done virtually by phone and by video conference. And but in the city, we also meet with people face to face. And then, of course, we do lots of workshops. So that's why. So executive presence workshops for groups in-house. And that's so we travel to where they are, where the client is.
Perfect. Harrison, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. Great content.
Likewise.
I'm sure everyone here learned a lot. Hopefully they feel a little challenged. they find some goals, some targets to set. But I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Scaling Up Services with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at scalingupservices.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at scalingupservices.com/newsletter.